The Conservative, Daniel Kawczynski, has long been a defender of Saudi Arabia and came in earlier. I'm asking you whether you condemn those executions.
I'm against capital punishment, and I believe my government is fundamentally against capital
do you
punishment.
specifically condemn these political executions? These were political opponents they put to death. This man wasn't a murderer. He was a Shia activist who was executed because he's a Shia activist.
He was arrested while shooting on Saudi police officers, and he was convicted of plotting terrorist activities within Saudi Arabia, which would have put the lives of Saudi nationals at risk.
Do you believe he was a terrorist?
Well, it's very difficult for us to know who is telling.
Well, you're putting their case, so it sounds like you believe it. You accept it.
I am saying that this is what the Saudis are telling us. That these
so you just accept that?
Well, it's very difficult for us to, unless we get the transcripts of the court procedures, which, by the way, perhaps you ought to ask, the media ought to ask the Saudis for a transcript.
I'm saying these people are political prisoners. They are being eliminated because they are political opponents of the Saudi regime.
Well, you are claiming they're political prisoners.
Yes, and I'm asking you whether you accept that in any way, and you clearly don't.
How have you substantiated that they're political prisoners?
Are you denying that the fact that these are Shia activists taking part in protests has got anything to do with the fact that they are being arrested, being imprisoned and being executed?
I think it's very easy to make these statements when many people who are critical of Saudi Arabia and their judicial process and their motives they haven't visited Saudi Arabia.
Would Saudi Arabia be within its rights to hit the Iranian embassy in Yemen, as it is today being accused of by the Iranians?
Well, that's the allegation that's been made, and I don't know the details of the situation. But of course not. Of course, if the Saudis are deliberately targeting, or I should say, if the coalition forces, of which there are 10 Gulf states, are deliberately targeting the Iranian compound in Yemen, that would be completely unacceptable. And I would very much hope the British government would condemn the Saudis for that. But we don't have proof as yet that was the case. But the situation in Yemen is critical. I have spoken on this in the past. It's extremely, if we don't get around in Saudi Arabia around the table to sort themselves out, the killing and mass killing in Yemen will continue. That's why it's important to engage with both countries.
Yes.
No matter how unpalatable certain domestic actions may be.
So you do find their domestic actions unpalatable?
Well, I find, as I said, for the fourth
Which
time...
ones do you find unpalatable?
I find capital punishment unpalatable,
yes.
very unpalatable.
What about their hatred of homosexuality?
I think that is very regrettable and highly reprehensible.
And what about the way they treat women?
I think that significant strides are being made in the way that women are treated. There are more women now in further education than men.
Okay, so that's not reprehensible.
There's far more to go.
Are you comfortable with British munitions being used by Saudi Arabia in Yemen?
If the British munitions and planes are being used in Yemen to take on the Houthi rebels who are creating instability and carnage within that country. There is a UN mandate at the moment for the coalition states to be involved in bringing peace and stability to Yemen, yes.
And the civilian casualties are just a regrettable byproduct of that?
Well, the civilian casualties are, of course, very regrettable, but there have been, unfortunately, civilian casualties in any war that has taken place, including the ones that we've been involved in Iraq and in Syria.
The Saudis threaten repercussions on Britain when people like Jeremy Corbyn get their way and contracts are cancelled.
Well,
what kind of friend threatens repercussions to do with international terrorism?
Well, they haven't threatened us in the way that you suggest.
Well, they just say repercussions. We all know what that means. There's only two things we get from Saudi Arabia.
Well, I think
it's jobs and terrorism cooperation.
What I would say to you is that Mr. Corbyn and I are at fundamentally different levels.
You're on the Saudi side when it comes to that debate between the Saudis and Corbyn,
I'm on the British side. I'm on the British side. I'm on the British side, and I take great offence that somebody, on Twitter has referred to me as the honourable member for Riyadh. I am on the British side.
I think that was another MP, wasn't it? It was Douglas Carswell.
Yes, I am on the British side, and what I'm interested in is British national strategic interests. And that is what compels me to engage with Saudi Arabia and to continue to work with them, because I'm interested in British national interests.
Why do you take such exception to that description, though? I mean, you are their only, it seems, defender in Parliament. their only representative. You've come here today to tell us what they tell you. You are representing them to some degree, aren't you?
Well, I think in a democracy, when it comes to the fact that we export £6 billion to them every year and the fact that 100,000 British jobs are dependent. I mean, one of the MPs that went with me on my visit, Mark Menzies from Filed, BAE Systems. BAE Systems in his constituencies sell more in Saudi Arabia than they do.
Well, then you should be proud of being called the Honourable Member for Saudi Arabia.
No, because that infers that I am working on behalf of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, you are?
I am working on behalf of the United Kingdom in promoting British national strategic interests, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else. And I will continue to do so as long as I think it's in our country's interest to engage with that country. I know it's very popular. It's very fashionable to be anti-Saudi. And I could go out there and be like Jeremy Corbyn and demonstrate against Saudi and say terrible things about him. I could get a lot of applause for that. But personally, I don't believe it's in our country's national strategic interest to sever links with this very important ally of ours in the Middle East.